Let me put a little raise in.
Whole lot of money.
Last
Whole lot
episode,
of
we
money.
touched
Got
on
a whole lot of
each
money.
team's best player of the 2010s of the AFC. In this episode, we're talking about the
NFC.
the NFC, yes. And so we'll just jump right into it.
Yep.
NFC East, the division of the offensive line, as you'll see in a minute.
Yep.
And we're gonna start right off with that. And the other guy I was really thinking about was Jason Witten. Jason Witten is synonymous with the Dallas Cowboys franchise. Just a really solid tight end, fan favorite, who's actually now on my Oakland Raiders. So hopefully, obviously in the prime of his career, but hopefully he can bring some life down to Darren Waller.
See.
But no, in the decade, Witten was a 5-time Pro Bowler, most receptions amongst tight ends in the decade, third in total yards, just over 7,000, and fifth in touchdowns, with 45. Those numbers kind of speak for themselves. The Dallas Cowboys have been very fortunate to have a lot of good players come through there. Jason Witten being one of them. Zach Martin, Travis Frederick.
Yeah.
A lot of really good players coming into Dallas. But to me, Tyron Smith was just a cornerstone on that offensive line. He's been named to the Pro Bowl every season since 2013. Two-time first team All-Pro. Like, this guy is legit. And if we're being honest, he's probably responsible for a lot of the success that Tony Romo had. But again, Tyron Smith is ridiculous, and I don't think it was any question he was probably the best Dallas Cowboy in the decade.
Yeah. Tyron Smith was also my pick. It was between him and Zach Martin for me, but I went with Tyron Smith, a 7-time Pro Bowler and 2-time first-team All-Pro. As you mentioned, played 131 games, had some injuries, but everyone does. But Tyron Smith, when he was healthy, was an absolute monster. Exactly. Yeah. Tyron Smith is like the second coming of Larry Allen for the Dallas Cowboys. So, I mean, when Troy Aikman had Larry Allen, whoever the Cowboys had a quarterback, whether it be Romo or Dak Prescott, had a great blindside tackle to rely on when things were going bad. He played a very valuable position, blindside tackle, incredibly valuable. Mm-hmm. And to make 7 Pro Bowls at blindside tackle is just absolutely incredible. Great job for him. And the Cowboys did a really good job building a great offensive line around him.
So going from one great offensive line to another, or at least another good candidate, we're going to go to the Philadelphia Eagles now, who have had a very, very, very solid offensive line for the last couple of years. Oh, sorry, I won't say very solid, but they've had a good offensive line.
They built it really well over the last 3 or 4 years.
They built it very, very well, yes. And the guy I picked was Jason Peters. Honorable mention note to Fletcher Cox. Fletcher Cox has become the cornerstone of the Philadelphia Eagles defense. Pro Bowler each of the last 5 seasons. First team All-Pro in 2018. 121 quarterback hits, 48 sacks, 62 tackles. This guy's legit. 62 tackles for loss, not 62 tackles. I jumped the gun there. But this guy's legit. But Jason Peters is just he's like Tyron Smith. He's just something else. Not necessarily right now, but in his prime, like especially in the last couple of years, like he was something else. And again, like he's not great right now. And the Eagles actually just brought him back, I think, a couple days ago. But I think he's a very nice addition to help Carson Wentz. Anyways, that's kind of irrelevant right now. But yeah, to me, Jason Peters was the best Philadelphia Eagle of the decade.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. The Philadelphia Eagles over the last 3-4 years, actually, I think it was around 2015, 2016 when they drafted, Lane Johnson and Brent Brooks and those really big pieces that really brought that offensive line from being one of the mediocre, one of the below average to one of the best in the league. Right. And that was around when they started doing it. But they had a piece to build around. Jason Peters. Mm-hmm. Jason Peters was playing at an unbelievable pace before all those pieces came together. So they built that right side of the line with Brandon Brooks and Lane Johnson. But the blind side, Jason Peters was there protecting Nick Foles and Kevin Cobb and whoever they had, whoever they trotted out as quarterback before Carson Wentz.
Oh my God.
And I mean, Carson Wentz probably has him to thank for those first few years for really helping him, not have to think too much about that blind side because Jason Peters did a really good job blocking it. It's just, 125 games. He got injured a fair amount. He definitely sustained some injuries later on in his career, and of course he kind of got replaced with the Andre Dillard pick last year. He's going to come in this coming year to replace Brandon Brooks, who tore his Achilles. He's going to be a guard, but I mean, he seems like the type that's versatile enough to transition into being a guard.
Exactly.
That's why they brought him back, and he knows the scheme too. But we're not talking about Jason Peters as a fit for the Eagles right now. We're talking about how well he's done as a blindside tackle for the last 10 years, and he's been absolutely incredible. He's been one of the better ones. I can't say the best in the division because I'd still probably take Tyron Smith or maybe even the next guy we're talking about over him. But still, he's been absolutely incredible. You got to give him a lot of credit as being one of the better pass blockers we've seen. A lot of great players on the Eagles over the last decade. This is probably one of the more difficult decisions that we had to make, considering you do have great candidates on the offensive line like Jason Kelsey and Brandon Brooks.
There's a lot of
Lane
really
Johnson.
good options, like Shady McCoy as well.
Malcolm Jenkins, and of course Fletcher Cox is probably my number 2, as you mentioned. Sure. He's been again, if Aaron Donald didn't exist, we'd be talking about Fletcher Cox as that premier defensive tackle, run stopping. He's incredible. He's incredibly versatile. He does a lot of things really well. The Eagles had a solid decade because of these guys that we just mentioned, and let's, I guess, talk about a team that didn't really have a great decade.
They sucked.
Yeah, the Washington Redskins. Besides that, 1 year they made the playoffs.
The Washington question marks, because we don't know what they're going to be named yet.
Well, for the decade they were the Redskins, so let's go with that.
I'm going to call them the question marks.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah, honorable mentions to Ryan Kerrigan, who's still on the team, and he had a really good decade. London Fletcher didn't play for a long part of the decade.
Yeah, Ryan Kerrigan was a few good players to come out of the Redskins this decade.
Yeah, again, he played outside linebacker, defensive end. So you're not going to make that many Pro Bowls when you have the competition that you have at that position. But he did a very good job put up really good numbers.
Yep.
London Fletcher, the same thing, except he was at the beginning of the decade. But Trent Williams is the obvious pick.
Yeah, like Trent Williams it's not really debatable. And again, I think it says a lot about the Redskins and like the players that they've had and the lack of star power that's come out of Washington the last decade. But Trent Williams is so scary.
He could maul guys. He could really maul. He could maul in pass protection.
Yeah, his problem is staying healthy. And like again, like I think of this is a guy who if he could stay healthy, he's probably one of the best tackles in the league.
Honestly, even now, 7 Pro Bowls in the last 9 years, he's still got it.
And shout out to Ryan Kerrigan, probably one of the most underappreciated linebackers in the league. I had no idea, but I had no idea this stat was actually a thing, but. Since he entered the league in 2011, Ryan Kerrigan has 90 sacks.
You didn't know sacks were a thing?
No, I didn't know he had 90 of them, and I didn't know that's the fourth. That's the fourth. Best,
yeah, that's actually incredible.
That's the 4th best measure, the 4th best sack total since 2011. But anyway,
is it actually? That's insane.
Yeah. Ryan Kerrigan. Again, so Ryan Kerrigan, very underappreciated linebacker for the Redskins, but still doesn't even hold a candle to Trent Williams, at least in my opinion.
Well, with 90 sacks, he does hold a candle, but Trent Williams still wins.
No,
Trent Williams still wins. Trent Williams beat cancer, so you got to give him credit there.
Yeah, that's fair.
Moving on to the Giants, and they do not really have a great offensive line to speak of, so we'll talk about other positions. I
pick Saquon Barkley.
In the end of the decade, you could very well go with Saquon Barkley.
I'm not actually going with Saquon, guys. I'm just
a year and a half of work is not enough. I think the pick here, you're probably gonna watch and think it's obviously Eli Manning, right? Well, yeah, it is Eli Manning, but it's a little closer than you think, right? Yeah. Odell Beckham Jr. had an incredible few years with the Giants.
His first 3 seasons were absurd.
He almost got picked. He almost got the pick for me. It was actually kind of close. I also want to give shout outs to Victor Cruz, who was a slightly worse Odell Beckham Jr. before Odell Beckham Jr. came around. He had some injury issues, but he played really well. Defensive end Jason Pierre-Paul was actually he was a mauler. He put up great numbers
before he blew up
in his prime.
With the firework.
fingers. I think he only has 3 on that one hand now. And I also want to give a shout out to Antrell Roll, who also a very underappreciated player. He played for the Cardinals at the turn of the decade. Then he was on the Giants. He did a really good job. He was a tackle monster at safety, which is pretty impressive. So you got to give him credit there. Obviously, Eli Manning's the pick. I'll just give you the stats that are significant. He was a Super Bowl MVP, made the Pro Bowl 3 times at the most stacked position in the league. You knock on him for throwing a lot of picks, but he had a 62% completion percentage, which isn't terrible, considering he played 147 games and he threw a lot per game. Like, you gotta respect that. Almost 39,000 yards through the air. I think those are really the significant numbers. He did not have the greatest decade. I will give you that, but he did a lot for this team. And he was at least for the first half of the decade, he was that constant that really allowed the team to build in other areas around him, because they didn't really have to worry about him until the end of the decade.
Yeah. It's kind of disappointing how Eli Manning's tenure with the Giants ended, just with a lot of people kind of disrespecting him despite how much he did for the franchise. But again, he was my pick as well. To me, it really was just between OBJ and Eli Manning. Talking about teams that are maybe struggling with quarterbacks right now, we're going to talk about the Chicago Bears. And
they had a pretty rough decade.
Yeah.
They had an NFC Championship appearance in 2010, and then they just couldn't get back to the playoffs until 2018. Quarterback play went down a cliff with Jay Cutler, and the rest of the team just wasn't able to pick up the slack.
For me, the Bears, this one actually wasn't too difficult. I thought it was going to be a bit more difficult than it ended up being. Matt Forte was a very good all-purpose back. He was very, very solid. In 8 seasons with the Bears, he rushed for almost just over 8,500 yards, 64 touchdowns. Second on Chicago's all-time rushing yards, receptions, and 100-yard games. Third in total touchdowns and 6th in receiving yards. My honorable mentions were Jay Cutler, even though I wasn't considering it. Lance Briggs, Brandon Marshall, Julius Peppers. To me, I just thought Matt Forte, he was head and shoulders above everyone else. But anyways, that was my take on it.
Yeah, this video here is talking about the most valuable player to each team over the decade, and over the last 20 years, I'd say, probably a little more so this decade than last decade, teams are starting to go away from the whole ground and pound strategy that they used to do. And they're now more throwing. It's more of a throwing league now. So running backs tend to fall by the wayside. That being said, running back is also a less, durable position. So running backs don't last as long. So because of that, we're not going to talk about too many running backs on this list. But Matt Forte is the obvious pick. He's one of the exceptions on this list. He's the obvious pick for the Bears. The Bears did not have a great decade. They changed their team a lot over the decade. Matt Forte probably played for them longer than most did. He got 88 games of service in with the team and almost 6,500 yards on the ground. That's just on the ground.
Yeah.
4.4 yards per carry. That's pretty impressive, considering he did that over 6-7 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty damn good.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, again, as you mentioned, an all-purpose back. Made 2 Pro Bowls at a very stacked position, running back. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to make the Pro Bowl as a running back, and it's not easy to do it over multiple years. Matt Forte did.
Mm-hmm.
And let's go to the Lions, which does not have an obvious pick. There are 3 players.
I struggled with this one.
Yeah, there are 3 that really, really deserve to get this pick. There are 3, but I have a bias. I'm personally a little biased, so I'll just tell you who I picked. I picked Megatron.
Yeah, I did too.
And it's fair to say that Megatron doesn't deserve it over Matthew Stafford or Ndamukong Suh. It's fair to say that Ndamukong Suh was an absolute monster that could play defensive end or defensive tackle. Yeah. And when he was with the Lions and when he was healthy and not suspended, he was insane. He was unstoppable. He was one of those guys that it doesn't matter if you double him. It really didn't. And Matthew Stafford is just going to go down as one of the most underappreciated players ever. All time. No question about that. All time. And obviously you want to give him love every opportunity you can. Megatron, when we argue in favor of Megatron here, it's partially because Megatron as a receiver, in my opinion, is the second best receiver that's ever played the game, behind Jerry Rice.
Really?
I take him over Randy Moss. I take him over Terrell Owens. I take him over anybody else.
I
It's
take
just
Antonio Brown over him. Ha, ha,
well,
ha.
Antonio Brown and Megatron were very, very different players.
Yeah,
But
no, for sure.
just think, if you want to think about Megatron, because you probably if you haven't watched him play, because he played for the Lions when he was playing.
Goes.
Just think about Julio Jones, but a slightly worse route runner and slightly better hands.
Yeah.
And just only ran deep routes. He played 90 games, nearly 8,600 yards, and 15.9 yards per reception. So he was going pretty far, and Matthew Stafford was equipped to throw the ball to him.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason why Megatron isn't like the for sure number one is because he had a lot of success before the decade started. He was drafted second overall in 2007. Yeah, if only the Raiders picked him first overall instead of Jamarcus Russell, that would have been
Shut up.
yeah, that would have been interesting.
Shut up.
But anyways, six-time Pro Bowler in the 2010s, made the first team All-Pro 3 times at wide receiver, which is also a stacked position. So you got to give him credit there. You know, Megatron was just the guy. He was the guy that gave off defensive coordinators nightmares. It was him.
Yeah. I went that direction as well. Calvin Johnson or Megatron. I'm gonna go with Megatron. Was ridiculous. There were 3 other guys I was kind of considering. 2 some more than the others. The 2 that you mentioned, Matthew Stafford and Ndamukong Suh, were probably the 2 I was considering the most. But the other guy I want to give some love to is Darius Slay.
Yep.
Darius Slay, I don't think he's in the same class as Megatron or Matthew Stafford, who, as you mentioned, is probably going to go down as one of the most underappreciated quarterbacks when it's all said and done. He's remarkably consistent, and just his stats are always ridiculous. But no, just to quickly give some love to Darius Slay. But Slay's a perennial Pro Bowler at corner, and it really is too bad that Matt Patricia had to go alienate him so he could get traded to Philly. But yeah, anyways, it's Megatron. And moving on to another team in the NFC North, the Green Bay Packers. Again, this isn't overly
easy.
hard. It's Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, it's easy.
2-time MVP winners. It's MVP winner who also won the Super Bowl.
And Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah, exactly. There's not really much we have to say here. Third most touchdown passes in the decade of 305. And that was in 11 fewer games than Drew Brees, who was second with 345. And in 14 fewer games than second place Tom Brady at 316. So that kind of tells you a lot about Aaron Rodgers. But again, I think his case would have actually been even better once if he actually had some reliable offensive options. But anyways, he has Vontae Adams, who was one of my honorable mentions, who was a top 5 wide receiver in the league. Clay Matthews, another one, as well as Jordy Nelson. Those were kind of my 3 honorable mentions. But again, it's Aaron Rodgers. There's not really any question about it. And if you think I'm wrong, frankly, you're wrong. I'm sorry.
Agreed. I think the most significant stat for me is the 103.6 quarterback rating.
Right.
In 142
yes.
games.
Ridiculous.
In 142 games, his quarterback rating is 103.6.
That's absurd.
Yeah, just for reference, Tom Brady's is around 99. That's a pretty significant difference.
Yeah. Which is still respectable.
Tom Brady's just for the decade. Tom Brady, this is just for the decade.
Yeah.
I think 103.6 might be one of the best all time, at least for a period of time. And his, a 1.3% in interception rate to a 6.2% touchdown rate. That's insane. There's not really much. Yeah, there's not much else to say. Aaron Rodgers is just one of those players. He's mobile. He can throw the deep ball really well. He can throw the short ball really well. He does everything incredibly well, and he was the best quarterback in the league for a period of time. His 2011 season was one of the best the quarterbacks ever had.
Yeah.
That MVP year, yeah, that's one of the best the quarterbacks ever had. It was absolutely insane. I guess we won't dwell on this a little bit longer. We'll move on to the Vikings, and as I mentioned earlier, running backs aren't that valuable in the grand scheme of things over a decade for a team because it's just not a versatile position and not a durable position. It is a versatile position, depending. Adrian Peterson didn't really play it in a versatile way. He was very much just a bruiser, but he was probably the best bruiser we've seen since, I don't know, John Riggins, someone like that.
Yeah.
Adrian Peterson he had a lot of success before the decade started. 2007 was his rookie season. He won MVP. I think he won some sort of. I think he might have won MVP in 2007.
Yep.
But he won MVP again in 2012. The last non-quarterback to do it. Twice first-team All-Pro, 4-time Pro Bowler. Had some stuff in the middle of the decade, but I mean, when he was on, he was on. He had 7,000 yards, over 7,000 yards in 77 games. 4.8 yards per carry. For a bruiser down the middle runner like Adrian Peterson was, that's incredibly impressive.
Yep.
And he was literally carrying the Vikings for the years he was playing healthy. In 2012, the Vikings made the playoffs. Their quarterback was Christian Ponder. I think you can kind of understand who ran the offense there, right?
Offensive Player of the Year 2012.
I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in the Hall of Fame when all is said and done. And the fact that he's still playing and starting is pretty incredible to me. That honestly makes me think, yeah, he's making the Hall of Fame. But there are a lot of running backs in there.
I think he will.
There are a lot of running backs in there, and I don't know if he stands up to those old relics of the past that really ran their offense. He might be the last running back to really run an offense.
Mm-hmm.
Honorable mentions to Harrison Smith, Everson Griffin, and Anthony Barr, and Daniil Hunter. Obviously, those guys were incredible, but Adrian Peterson takes it.
Yeah, so again, I think you kind of nailed it with Adrian Peterson. You really beat me to the punch. My main honorable mention was Harrison Smith. Not really much to say here. The guy, he used a huge part of that Minnesota Vikings defense.
He does everything. He does everything at an elite level.
Yeah, he's a very scary guy. And that being said, let's move on to the NFC South, and you will get right on. We'll just jump right to
You would probably think sorry for interrupting you, but
No,
you'd
go ahead.
probably think like, yeah, this is the division of the quarterback, right? Well,
not
yeah,
so.
I didn't pick quarterbacks here. Like obviously we have 2 MVPs and one incredibly decorated decorated quarterback in this division over the last decade. But those teams had one other player that was just absolutely monstrous, insane, generational on their team, and we just had to pick them. I'm talking, of course, about Matt Ryan and Cam Newton. I'm just going to shout them out right now. I didn't pick either of them. I kind of wish I did, but there were 2 generational talents on each of their teams, respectively, that we had to pick. I'm assuming you picked both of them too. You picked Julio and Luke Kuechly.
I did. Yeah.
All right. We'll start with Julio Jones, I guess. I'll just say the meaningful stats. He had 12,125 yards over the decade on 797 catches. Basically, he put up Megatron numbers if Megatron played the whole decade.
Yeah.
That's saying something. 15.2 yards per catch. So he's going pretty far down the field, and a 63.7 catch percentage.
Yeah.
And he made the Pro Bowl 7 times and twice made first team All-Pro in a very stacked position with guys like Antonio Brown and AJ Green. So that has to be recognized. Well, yeah, near the end, yeah. But
I know.
Here's the thing. Matt Ryan played incredibly over the decade. He played incredibly over the entire decade. He's definitely going to be one of those underappreciated players, although he won an MVP, so he probably won't be underappreciated like Matthew Stafford, but he will be underappreciated.
We're looking at a Pro Bowl. I don't say Pro Bowl, but maybe one day Hall of Famer Matt Ryan.
Yeah, it's a maybe.
It's a
But
maybe.
Julio Jones is a definite Hall of Famer.
Mhm.
If he has one more year like the years he's had, he's got it. He's done incredible things over his career, and he has really spoiled the Falcons as far as offensive playmakers have gone, because they moved on from Roddy White straight to him, and he is given defensive coordinators nightmares having to face him for sure. And he nearly single-handedly torched the Patriots in that Super Bowl. Honorable mentions: Matt Ryan, center Alex Mack, who played most of his time with the Browns, but he played really well with the Falcons, and tight end Tony Gonzalez, who's definitely a top 3 tight end ever, but he ended his career with the Falcons at the beginning of the decade, and he played really, really well.
Just talking about Luke Kuechly, again, this is another guy who it's really too bad, because if he didn't have as many concussions as he ended up having, I don't think that it would even be close comparing to Cam Newton. I think he's very similar to Brian Urlacher, but yeah, like he's just a very complete linebacker. And I think he really can help complement the Carolina Panthers defense.
Urlacher's actually a pretty decent comparison. The comparison I'd make is Patrick Willis. They're just some incredible. They're just some incredible parallels in terms of how long they played, the kind of stats they put up, the fact that they really played the position the same way. But that's an incredibly flattering comparison, and honestly, Kuechly probably surpassed it a little bit.
Honestly, probably. And if he wasn't hurt off as much as he was, he probably would have shattered it, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive that he won Defensive Player of the Year in his rookie season. And this was 2012, right? So, Von Miller was a rookie too. J.J. Watt was a rookie too. And he played a position that's a little less flashy than outside linebacker. Inside linebacker is just more of a coverage, run-stopping, just do what needs to be done, but don't do the fun stuff like sack the quarterback kind of position. But he still sacked the quarterback. Yeah. He did a great job. He had 18 picks over 118 games. So in coverage, he's pretty decent.
Right.
And 75 tackles for loss, 1,092 tackles. I think that's the most significant number that you'll see here, and that's over 118 games.
Yeah,
that's absolutely insane. Made the Pro Bowl 7 times, made first team All-Pro 5 times, which basically solidifies himself as the best middle linebacker of the decade, easily.
Yeah,
and Luke Kuechly was just the kind of guy that nothing really got by him. Yeah. Like you couldn't really fool him. You had a very difficult time fooling him. The one time I've ever seen him not look amazing was that one time he had to cover Julio Jones.
And Julio Jones.
Yeah, Julio literally just jumped over him, took the ball, and then walked into the end zone behind him.
That's funny.
It was a really nice catch. But I mean, you can't really expect anyone to cover Julio like that, let alone Luke Kuechly. But for an inside linebacker, Luke Kuechly was a good coverage guy for sure. My honorable mentions were Cam Newton, offensive lineman Trey Turner, and Ryan Khalil. Ryan Khalil is going to be one of those unsung heroes, but at center he played incredibly well, and he made quite a few Pro Bowls. He was definitely one of those really reliable players that made sure Cam Newton wasn't running all the time at the beginning of his career.
Yeah. No, for sure. And another honorable mention goes out to Christian McCaffrey again. Not a huge sample size, at least not enough to put him in the kind of top tier of kind of options for the Panthers. But again, whenever you're talking about the Panthers, you got to shout out CMC. It's a rule. Otherwise, the Grim Reaper will come kill you. New Orleans Saints, again, not
easy.
A lot of debate here. Drew Brees. Yeah. MVP, Super Bowl MVP to start off the decade, so that's obviously a good start. But he's still playing, and so is Tom Brady. So this is subject to change. All-time leader in career passing yards and touchdowns. This guy is ridiculous. This is Hall of Fame we're talking about. Probably one of the best quarterbacks of the decade, at least in his prime.
Yeah. He's gonna go down as one of the most, if not the most accurate quarterbacks that's ever played the game. His completion percentage is about 70%, considering he played 153 games.
Yeah, in the decade, he led all NFL quarterbacks with almost 47,000 yards, 345 touchdown passes, and 69.5 completion percentage, and third in wins as a starting QB, which again isn't really the best stat to use.
He also
but
played for the Saints, and the Saints did not have a great defense for
yeah, that's the other
basically
thing.
the entire decade.
Yeah. Honorable mention goes out to Cam Jordan. Cam Jordan is a ridiculous defensive end. Extremely consistent. He's a great pass rusher, great run defender. But that being said, first team All Pro in 2017, and then second team in 2018, 2019, and again, Cam Jordan's a monster. Then he was my only other honorable mention for the Saints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. I threw down as honorable mentions Jari Evans, the guard from the first half of the decade, who made a few Pro Bowls and did a really good job. He's a guy I'd never even heard of before doing this research, so I guess it was good to recognize a guy like that. And I also threw Michael Thomas down.
Yeah,
just
Mike Thomas, right.
That
Sorry.
record-setting season from last year.
Yeah.
But yeah. Moving on to the Buccaneers, they had a really rough decade too. They didn't make the playoffs once. I think they had mostly losing seasons. I think their best seasons were 7-9. I think those were the best seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Jameis Winston, give him some credit. He didn't do a horrible job, and this team was actually way worse off before him.
Yep.
If we're being completely honest.
Nope.
Like Josh McCown, Josh Freeman, whoever they were really trotting out there, Matt McGloin. It just Fitzmagic at the end, but before Jameis came around, nothing really worked. But we could say one thing for sure is that they had one defensive player that was just doing everything that needed to be done, and just the captain and the leader of that defense for the entire decade. It's Gerald McCoy.
Sure.
He is really the only player on the Buccaneers that really made consistent Pro Bowls and all Pro teams. Made the first team All Pro once, made 6 Pro Bowls. Put up some really good numbers, 54.5 sacks in 123 games, 79 tackles for loss, 297 tackles. And this is a defensive tackle here. This is the guy in the middle of the offensive line. Or the middle of the defensive line. Mm. So, he's getting doubled for the most part. And all things considered, the Buccaneers didn't really have much of a pass rush back in the day. So he was kind of doing it on his own. So just absolutely incredible what he's done. What he's done is comparable to Ndamukong Suh. They were both drafted together, 2nd and 3rd overall in 2010, I want to say, maybe before that. And they've been together the entire decade in terms of the stats they've been putting up. Just for reference, if you know much more about Ndamukong Suh than you do about Gerald McCoy. Mm-hmm. Now Gerald McCoy is on the Cowboys. Last year he played for the Panthers, but he was just a long-time Buccaneer, so he knows a thing or two about losing and mediocrity. Right. When mediocrity is the best part of your decade. But yeah, honorable mentions, linebacker Levante David, who was there for a while and was really just, once Gerald McCoy got settled in, he was just that stalwart in the middle that could really help things out. Now their linebacker core is incredible, and Levante David has a large part in that. Wide receiver Mike Evans, who made a couple Pro Bowls. I think one of the first wide receivers ever to have 6 or 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He was really good.
Yep. So I actually went with Levante David, and Gerald McCoy was my honorable mention. Levante David, at least in my opinion, is one of the most overlooked and underappreciated players in the NFL. 722 solo tackles, most of any player since 2012. 14 fumble recoveries, most of any player since 2012. And that's the Buccaneers franchise record in a single season. Only player in the NFL with 20-plus sacks and 10-plus interceptions since 2012. He's also played a ton of defensive snaps, 7,634. So I guess it's not really a credit to how good he is as opposed to how much the Bucs use him. So again, to me, I was really battling between Levante David and Gerald McCoy. You really can't go wrong with either of them. They're both, again, this is a coin flip. They're both very extremely stellar defensive players for the Buccaneers, which is really all they really had. But that being said, both were great. Moving on to the NFC West, we will talk about another extremely mediocre team of another extremely mediocre decade, with the exception of maybe a couple years, and that is the Arizona Cardinals. And to me, there's really only two options here for me, and I went with Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Fitzgerald is I don't know if we can say it soundly, but he might be the best player in Arizona Cardinals history.
Oh, definitely.
Um,
Definitely. I think that's a certainty.
First ballot Hall of Famer, I don't think.
Yeah.
100 catches, 1,000 yards 2 years ago.
Easily.
He is just an extremely productive wide receiver, and still doesn't seem to get a lot of the recognition he probably should get. At least probably in the last couple of years, a lot of that's just been due to his age. He's not quite elite anymore. Again, there's not much I have to say here for Larry Fitzgerald, but again, Patrick Peterson, probably one of the best cornerbacks of the 2010s, at least in my opinion. 8 straight Pro Bowls, 3-time first team All-Pro, 25 interceptions last decade. Puts him in the top 10 for during that span. I'm not sure exactly where he is on that list, but anyways, top 10, which tells you a lot about him personally. And again, like, it was almost like, I don't want to say it's like Dale Revis and Revis Island, but
I would.
Patrick Peterson basically had that same effect. It was he had the ability to basically almost cancel out like one entire side of the field. But again, I had to go with Larry Fitzgerald. He's probably the face of the Arizona Cardinals, but Patrick Peterson's still a damn good player.
I felt really bad not picking Larry Fitzgerald.
You didn't pick Larry Fitzgerald?
No, I felt so bad not picking Larry Fitzgerald.
Yeah,
but
okay.
This is not a card that I play I've played often, but I'm going to play this card. Patrick Peterson was also one of the best kick and punt returners of the last decade.
That's fair.
So if we're talking value to the team, I mean that's kind of cheap, but it's absolutely true. He was really good at it. You could have also said that for Antonio Brown when we were talking about the Steelers, but you didn't, so it didn't count. But here we are talking about Patrick Peterson, who if we're talking about the best cornerbacks of the decade, it's him and Richard Sherman that you're really talking about mostly. You just don't throw to him. You can't. He looked more like a receiver than a cornerback whenever someone threw in his direction. His hands looked like Larry Fitzgerald's.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Also, 438 tackles for a cornerback. That's pretty good. He was productive in the run game too. Patrick, I think it was mostly just the whole 8 straight Pro Bowls to start a career kind of thing. Whereas Larry Fitzgerald had his most productive years in like 2008, 2009. 2010. Larry Fitzgerald was drafted. I think he was drafted in the top 3, along with like Eli Manning and then Phillip Rivers at 5. It was the same draft, 2004. That's how long Larry Fitzgerald's been playing, and Larry Fitzgerald was probably the most productive the most valuable player for the Cardinals in the 2000s. But if we're talking 2010s, I feel like Patrick Peterson did more for the team because Larry Fitzgerald was really slowing down. Not to give any disrespect to the guy, but he was basically playing like a tight end.
That's
and
I'll give him that.
And a shutdown cornerback will be much more valuable than a tight end any day of the week. That's just kind of the way Larry Fitzgerald
for sure.
played. It's also a testament to how the Cardinals really failed to build around him until lately. Yeah. But again, that's not really much of an argument. I went with Patrick Peterson just because I felt like he did something incredible in the decade, whereas Larry Fitzgerald, for me, in the decade looked like a above-average receiver.
Yeah, that's fair.
Patrick Peterson was way more than above average. Honorable mentions, Carson Palmer. I mean, he didn't play there for that long, but you got to give him credit because he led the Cardinals to their best record in franchise history, and they've been around for a damn long time.
Right.
And they've gone a long time without going 13-3. Carson Palmer ended that, played really well. Mm-hmm. Could have been recognized as MVP if Cam Newton didn't have the year that he did.
Yep.
And led them to the NFC Championship for the second time in franchise history. I think, second time in franchise history. Also want to give a shout out to Chandler Jones, who had nearly 20 sacks last year and has been just a sack monster ever since he got there. Calais Campbell, pretty much the same story, sack monster. Chandler Jones also plays linebacker, so he's a little more active in the other defensive endeavors like the run game and coverage and whatnot. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Calais Campbell and Chandler Jones are incredible at what they do.
Yep. Nope, for sure. And
speaking of incredible of what they do, we have the Rams next, and I think this is a pretty obvious one.
picked Jared Goff.
They had such a bad decade, the Rams. Yeah. They made the playoffs twice in the decade.
Don't be fooled by their one Super Bowl appearance. And again, they have one monster on their team. You know who he is. It's Aaron Donald. 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. And again, like he's just ridiculous. NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year, 9 sacks, 18 tackles for loss, and then in 6 seasons, Donald has 72.5 sacks, and in 2018 he set the NFL record for sacks by an interior lineman with 20.5. He, at least in my opinion, was the biggest reason why the Rams were able to make it to the Super Bowl last year. Sorry, not last year. In 2018. 2018, right? Yeah. We might be talking about Aaron Donald as one of the best defensive players of NFL history. Again, super early. I don't really want to say but I think there's at least an argument for it to be. I think there's at least an argument to be had about it. Honorable mentions. The main one I had was Todd Gurley. Yep. That was the main one I had. Again, I don't really think I need to say much about it. 10th overall pick in 2015. And again, like league high in 2018, the Super Bowl year, league high 21 touchdowns, and he was really their main offensive option outside of Cooper Kupp, who got hurt that year, and Jared Goff just sucked that year anyways. But anyways, Aaron Donald was my pick, and I don't think it's particularly close.
I'm not going to add much more to what you said because you really nailed it. I don't know if you mentioned 6 Pro Bowls and 5-time first team All-Pro in 6 or 7 seasons, but that's what he put down. Basically every year of his career, he was a first team All-Pro player in the interior. I just want to mention, and I mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention again. He's like 6'1" and 200 and below 250 pounds, which is the smallest interior lineman probably ever. And he's putting up the numbers that he's putting up. Yeah, 72.5 sacks as an interior lineman is crazy. We were talking about Gerald McCoy putting up 54.5 sacks as an interior lineman and saying that's incredible, which it is. But Aaron Donald, in 6-7 years, blew that out of the fucking water.
Yeah.
Aaron Donald could line up on the outside. He could line up on the inside. He could line up basically anywhere on the defensive line. It doesn't really matter. You could single him. You probably shouldn't. You could single him, but you could double him. You could maybe
Don't do that.
You could triple him. No, doubling him is just it doesn't work all the time.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Like his success rate on double coverage is way higher than anyone else's.
Yeah, which is absurd.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know the Pro Football Focus stats on all that, but right. I mean, watching him get double covered is just like a man manhandling 2 children.
Yeah.
I also want to throw an honorable mention to Johnny Hecker, who was the best. Who was the best punter he was the best punter in the league.
And then Greg Zuerlein, another really good kicker for the Rams.
Yeah.
Anyways, so moving on to another LA team, the 49ers.
What the fuck?
Joe Staley was my pick, left tackle for the Niners. He held on the position for the entire the decade, so I don't know why it took so long to get out. During that period, he earned 6 Pro Bowls, 3 second-team All-Pros. I thought he's a big reason why San Francisco went to 4 NFC Championships games. I mean, obviously at least in the last couple of years, they've kind of built a nice thing out there in San Francisco. When we're talking about tackles, I think he's, at least in my opinion, he's probably one of the most athletic, probably one of the more athletic tackles you've ever seen.
The Niners at the beginning of the decade had an unbelievable defense with guys like Navarro Bowman, Patrick Willis, Justin Smith. Those guys are just the examples, but they were leaders and they were absolutely insane. Alden Smith too, but he's not an honorable mention for me after all the shit he went through. But yeah, Joe Staley's the easy pick. Of all the players that we have mentioned on this list, of every single one, Joe Staley, I think, is the only one that really experienced the high highs of being on Super Bowl contender and the low lows of being on the worst team in the NFL, a team that drafted second overall like multiple times. Right. That nobody else experienced that. And so I give Joe Staley a lot of credit. Of all the other blindside tackles we mentioned, like Tyron Smith, Jason Peters, Trent Williams, he played more than all of them. He played 140 games. Yep. Which is a little bit more, made 6 Pro Bowls, and he had to compete with those guys to make those Pro Bowls, which, again, absolutely incredible. There really wasn't much space for any other blindside tackle in the league to make a Pro Bowl with these guys around. It's absolutely insane.
It was a really good decade for that.
Yeah, Joe Staley was just when the Niners were really bad, Joe Staley was like the only constant there. When Colin Kaepernick's play was really good some weeks and really bad others, he was there. When Chip Kelly was just from the inside imploding the team, he was there. For a blindside tackle, he did an unbelievable job at just like Joe Thomas doing his job when things around him weren't so great, and I give him a lot of credit there. And moving on to the final team on our list, the Steelers, the Seahawks, which was another very difficult one because they had, for me, I'll just name the players that I considered. And they're all multiple Pro Bowl, multiple first team All Pro players and Super Bowl winners that deserve to be recognized. Russell Wilson, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Bobby Wagner, and Marshawn Lynch. Those are the 5. I want to see if we pick the same person. I feel like we did.
I don't know. I'm scared.
All right, let's say it. Okay. I'm going to count from 3 to 1.
Okay.
After 1, we say it at the same time.
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Russell Wilson.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah. Okay. So it might just be a quarterback bias, but as you saw with the whole Matt Ryan, Cam Newton thing, we're not biased towards quarterbacks. We like other positions.
This guy is absolutely absurd. Probably the best quarterback in league right now, behind Mr. Blueshell and Mr. Lamar. But since his rookie season, Wilson.
I'm a Ravens fan. I'll say he's better than Lamar.
Really? Okay.
Right now? Yeah, sure.
Since Russell Wilson's rookie season, he owns the NFL's 6th highest passer rating with 101.2, the 5th most touchdown passes with 227, and the most again, this isn't a huge stat, but the most comebacks in the fourth quarter or overtime with 32 in regular or postseason games. Again, this is a guy who he was a huge reason why those Seahawks teams that won the Super Bowl were so great. And again, Marshawn Lynch, a huge part of that as well. A great rusher. Bobby Wagner is obviously still up and coming now as a linebacker. Richard Sherman, no joke. Don't put a sorry defender like on Crabtree or whatever.
Stop. Just stop.
No, but anyways, to me, Russell Wilson just wasn't really particularly close. This guy's elite. I think he's going to continue to grow as a quarterback. And also, I don't know about that, but he's great. And to me, it wasn't even really particularly close.
Look, it's tough because on this list you have over the last 8 years, let's say since 2012, you have the best cornerback in Richard Sherman. You have the best free safety in Earl Thomas, and you have probably a top 3, if not the best middle linebacker in Bobby Wagner. Yeah. On this list, which no other team has something this stacked. This is probably the most stacked list here. Yeah. The Seahawks had probably one of the best, one of the best decades in the NFL.
No question.
The reason we're picking Russell Wilson is just a hint of quarterback bias, but also the fact that his quarterback rating is above 100 over an entire decade, which nobody can really. Besides Rodgers and Breeze, no one's going to be saying, "Yeah, I played over 8 years and have a quarterback rating of over 101." Yeah, no one can. And the fact that he's a mobile quarterback, there's a misconception that mobile quarterbacks aren't accurate. They just coast on their athleticism. Russell Wilson is single-handedly bucking that. He's single-handedly saying, "Yeah, I'm a quarterback that can run better than any other quarterback, but I can also throw better than almost every quarterback. In fact, I could probably throw better than every quarterback right now besides Patrick Mahomes."
Yeah.
So he had a touchdown percentage of 6% and an interception percentage of 1.8, which mirrors Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers won MVP twice in this decade. He was a Pro Bowler 6 times at the most stacked position in the league, quarterback, and his completion percentage, not catch percentage, completion percentage is 64.5%.
Yeah.
So the guy was incredibly efficient for someone that could run. He's doing what elite players are doing in a very different way. And that for me is what deserves the respect, and that for me is why he's easily the best Seahawk, the most recognizable Seahawk of the decade, and the one that really deserves this spot.
Yeah. Yep. And that's all we have for you today. Thank you for listening to the Amateur Bowl podcast and the NFC Best Players of the Decade. We will see you next time.
Whole lot of money, I got a whole lot of money. Whole lot of money, you can't hold nothing from me.